Hello, this is Adam Feinberg, and today you are joining us with Harlem Stories. And I am joined today with Mark Becker, my co-host.
Hey, Adam, great to be here.
Awesome. Love having you here. So we're going to talk today about getting to know Inwood. So the northernmost section of Manhattan, with the exclusion, and we don't often talk about Marble Hill very often either, but it's like Marble Hill's like part of Manhattan, but it's not really part of Manhattan. It's like one of those kind of oddball situations, and honestly, I guess from a real estate perspective, there's not a whole lot of inventory in Marble Hill anyway. You're usually just talking a handful of listings, so that's why we hardly ever talk about it.
Well, it's weird because technically I think it's still a 212 area code, but
It is, yeah.
if anyone who's crossed that, if you know Inwood at all, you know where the Columbia Lions football stadium is.
Right.
And then if you were to take a swim or more conveniently cross the bridge there at around, I guess it's 225 and Broadway or so.
I'm wondering if that's how the coyotes and the deer have crossed over.
Yeah, it's actually a fascinating area. But you get to Marble Hill, you definitely feel like you're in the Bronx.
And just, for our listeners to know, if you're not familiar, Marble Hill was actually physically connected to Manhattan at one point. There was construction associated with, and they rerouted, the ship routes, and as a result, Marble Hill wound up getting physically separated from Manhattan.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's still a drawbridge, is it not, Adam?
I believe you're correct that
There's not a lot of ships that go through there. I
Right.
mean, it really just connects the Hudson to the East River or the Harlem River. I guess.
Right.
So
Right.
there's not really, if you're a ship, you might as well just keep going down the Hudson to get where you're going. So I don't think it's used very often.
I'd imagine those that have some sort of port on on the east side, lower down, or on Brooklyn side, maybe that's why you're going that route. But
Right.
I wouldn't imagine that is the same kind of route that it was originally created for.
So you're saying they actually blew that up and created that canal?
Yeah, exactly. So the canal was a little differently routed a little differently previously. So yeah, that actually changed. So we don't normally talk about about that portion, Marble Hill of Manhattan. It's geography wise, it is connected with the Bronx today. So that's not something we normally talk about. And we're going off script a little bit because but I at least wanted to mention it. But today our focus is really going to be on Inwood, and I think from a practical perspective, we're really considering it the northernmost neighborhood of Manhattan.
Got it.
So, and actually it was just going back on script and whatnot. Marble Hill, due to the modification of it was the Harlem Shipping Canal in 1895. It wound up getting separated and is now geographically in the Bronx. So it's as a result of landfill connecting the neighborhood in the Bronx. So, that's how it wound up changing. It was as a result of just opening up that canal a little differently and then filling in the land, connecting it to the Bronx. But Inwood itself is largely defined by water barriers, and you're looking at the Hudson River, and I don't know, maybe you know how to pronounce this better than I do, Spuyten Duyvil Creek, and the Harlem River. And then there's only the only real land barrier that we're talking about here is Dyckman Street, to the southern border of it, and that's really dividing, the Washington Heights and Inwood border. I think if you ask some of the locals, they might define that southern border a little further south, though.
And consider Inwood. Yeah, I always kind of thought of Washington Heights and Inwood as sort of one main village, if you will, and then the separate towns of Washington Heights and Inwood, the north and the south, but it all kind of meshes together.
Yeah, I mean, when you're the further north up there, it does kind of feel very similar, kind of a similar feel at that point.
Yeah.
At least on more like north to south, not necessarily east to west.
Right.
So east to west, there is kind of that dividing line of Broadway, and it just kind of makes that feel very differently. Going back to 1864, Inwood was at that point actually known as Tubby Hook. That I didn't actually know until I started doing a little bit of reading, in preparation for today's episode. So, I learned something out of this, definitely, and something I wasn't previously familiar with. A large portion of Inwood, it wasn't really truly developed until the A train went up to 207th Street. And, at that point, a great deal of residential development moved forward in the 1930s. And as a result of that time period, a lot of those buildings are of the Art Deco design. So, that's kind of a common theme that you'll see up there. Prior to that, Inwood was largely the location of country retreats for the socialite crowd, including Isidore Straus, who was the co-owner of Macy's, and he was actually, unfortunately, one of the passengers that fell victim on the Titanic.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, and there's actually, if you're looking a little further south in our neighborhoods, and maybe we'll talk about this in a separate episode, Strauss Park, around 107th or so, and Broadway. So it's a little triangle of park, 106, 107, right around there.
I know that area. There's actually a small jazz club right there.
Yeah, at 106, I think, if memory serves.
Right at the end of West End Avenue.
If memory serves, that place is called Smoke.
Something like that.
Yeah, so
it has to do with jazz or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely, and with I guess the worst of the pandemic over again, I think they wound up reopening about a year ago. So they were kind of closed for an extended period during COVID times. Yeah, well, that'll definitely put a date stamp on this episode. That's for sure. But yeah, he was also the Lords of Lord and Taylor department store. For those that remember that department store, which I think is largely out of business. And their names still have a presence in the neighborhood. So such as the Duke Siemens and the Ishams. So these are names that are kind of prevalent within these neighborhoods, and you'll still have like the Siemens Mansion and
there's a street called Seaman.
Yeah, and getting a little blue here. There, it's right near the intersection of Seaman and Cumming, and
just a little blast with that one.
Yeah, and just a little south of Dykeman Street. So. Having a little fun with street names there.
We got to put the parental advisory stamp on this episode.
Yeah, although I don't think a lot of kids would actually know what we're talking about. So, but yeah, I think that's as blue as we want to get in these episodes. A little hint of that. So yeah, a large portion in recent years, a large portion of Inwood has been redistricted. And I think that's I wouldn't call it a land rush by any kind of means, but it's definitely, created quite a bit of interest into the neighborhood. There's been a concentration of automotive-related businesses, such as like auto repair shops, along Broadway, and there's also large industrial aspects to the neighborhood, which has limited the residential market. So you've had the 207th Street yard for the subways, the Kingsbridge bus depot, Manhattan North Sanitation, and also Con Ed maintains a large presence up there as well. So when we talk about like the distinction of east versus west of Broadway, some of these really industrial sites are on the east side of these neighborhoods. So, and even if you look at, the northern portion of Washington Heights, you'll notice it's a very different, set of buildings than what you see west of Broadway. So yeah, these kind of give you the distinctions in these neighborhoods, from that. Whereas on the upper portion of Washington Heights, on the east side, it tends to be mostly, but not entirely, the rental buildings. Whereas you tend to see more co-ops in the Hudson Heights section of Washington Heights, and
Bennett Avenue.
Yeah, so it tends to give you a very kind of different feel, when you have that ownership stake in it, between these two neighborhoods. So I think that was kind of important thing to note over here. So new construction buildings have been rare, and but there are already plans in place, with the recent zoning, and I think actually, I think
there's one on Dykeman right now and Broadway.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And there's but there's a whole bunch of stuff going on where it's shovel ready. And I think actually I remember reading like a week or two ago that somebody was actually starting breaking ground on one of those new developments. So it kind of gives you a better sense as far as, like, let's say new construction condos or things like that. I only know of, I think, one, maybe two buildings that fit that. And they're small condos. So, maybe like 10, 15 units or something along those lines. But obviously there's bigger stuff in place with the rezoning, and there's a lot more options as well. But, what we talk about on a lot of these episodes is access to parks. And there's definitely no shortage of parks when you go this far north.
Absolutely.
There's a large portion of Inwood is taken up by Inwood Hill Park. It's almost 200 acres, 196.4. The park rises 200 feet above the Hudson River, and its topography had been shaped by the glaciers that covered much of New York. So you'll see that as a common theme in a lot of the upper Manhattan parks.
Yeah, and I always tell people, if you were to blindfold me and spin me around 3 times, put me in a helicopter and drop me in Inwood Hill Park, and then tell me I was somewhere in Montana, I'd have no reason to doubt you. It is a fascinating place, and I encourage anyone who visits Manhattan or lives here to take a day trip there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to go a little deeper dive into that as to why that's the case as well. So from that aspect, when you're talking about it, the park is actually known for its caves that were used by the Lenape tribe before the Europeans arrived. And I would tend to say these aren't really true caves. They're more like recesses in the large rock formations formed by the glaciers, but they formed small spaces for shelter, and arrowheads have been found as recently as the 1950s in these mini caves. So when you say you could be dropped in the middle of in the middle of the country, Montana or any other
Sure.
state that's just doesn't have like large cities or anything like that, this is exactly the reason why. And there's actually also 3 freshwater springs in the park, one of which was used for drinking water by the workers who constructed the Henry Hudson Bridge, and a portion of land that was once known as Cold Spring as a result. In more recent years, the park includes a restored marshland attracting wildlife and fishing. There have been coyotes and spotted up there more than a handful of times, and I think that bridge that winds up connecting. I'm wondering if they're either swimming over. It's not a very large, but I know the current is strong, or they're taking that drawbridge over that connects Manhattan to the Bronx.
Well, that area of Spuyten Duyvil / Riverdale is very hilly and pretty desolate, so I wouldn't be shocked if there's some animals living there.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that's how they're coming into Manhattan.
Sure.
I think that's a distinct possibility. In terms of other parks and park space, there's also and this has been fascinating, and there's been some headlines that kind of changed this a little bit, but there's also Sherman Creek Park, also known as Swindler Cove. I've actually gone up to this mini park. I'll call it a mini park. It was at one point a community dumping ground, and there were like rusted out cars and sunken boats and construction debris littering the space. It had to have been like 10 to 15 years ago. They cleaned it up and made it into this mini pocket park. And today it has a series of ponds and mini waterfalls, and there's footpaths leading to birdhouses and a communal garden. And contrary to what we've been hearing in the headlines in the last couple of weeks, where Manhattan got its first beach, on the west side downtown, we did actually have a small beach in Manhattan, and that was actually in this Swindler's Cove over here. Very tiny beach, but it was a beach. It's a total of 5 acres, and it often gets overlooked and forgotten by so many, but it's one of those little hidden treasures that like hardly anybody knows about. But I went up there, I want to say maybe 5-7 years ago, and and it was just so awesome and unique. I just don't get to go up that way too often, but yeah, I definitely would recommend anybody that wants to kind of find something to do that's interesting and different that hardly anyone knows about. This is definitely one of those things.
Sure.
Moving on the park scene over here, Isham Park. It's a 20-acre park, and it's located roughly between Broadway, Isham Street, Seaman Avenue, and West 214-215. It was shortened by reconfiguring of area streets and the formation of Inwood Hill Park. Again, we talk about like Upper Manhattan. We are always talking about the so many parks and green spaces, and these are good representation of that. And I guess moving on from the park aspect over here, there's other aspects that are worth exploring in Inwood. So for those that might have, and I actually found this accidentally just walking uptown one day along Broadway. There's the Dyckman House, and it is actually the oldest farmhouse in Manhattan. It's on Broadway on 204th Street, and it's still standing. This is actually the only museum in Inwood. It's a Dutch colonial style house, farmhouse, and it was built by William Dyckman. So when we talk about Dyckman Street, this is the real person behind it. By the early 1900s, apartment houses with stores replaced the surrounding fields and barns. But the farmhouse still remains standing. You just drive or walk along Broadway, and you'll see it. So. I think that's pretty cool. Another thing worth mentioning over here is the small historic district. There's Park Terrace West, West 217th Street. And it's just a small little swath of land, but it's pretty newly designated back, I think, in 2018. And the homes are more typically found in suburban neighborhoods outside of Manhattan. So when I say that, I mean they're 2-story red brick style, Tudor Revival, and Colonial Revivals with Craftsman style details. So anybody that knows the Sears Craftsman houses in the rest of the country that were just sold by catalog, it's got some influence by that.
And I got to tell you, every time I go up to that area, whether it's to play tennis or to hang out in the park, I love taking that little walk on 217th Street and just to see those houses. It's really a gas to see freestanding homes in Manhattan. As you said, they look like suburban homes.
Right, yeah, and you're talking about, over here, they're like either freestanding or semi-detached. They have basement garages, and they embrace 20th century car culture.
So love that area at 217th Street.
Yeah, and with the fact that they've got garages, I mean that's not something that you'll typically see, in Manhattan is like 1 and 2 family homes that have that.
Right.
So every once in a blue moon, but this is a whole historic district filled with that. Also, many of them actually also have front yards that work with the topography up there. So, that's another kind of cool feature that you don't often see, even with Manhattan townhouses. I know you can find that in Convent Avenue, but that's, aside from a few, a handful of houses throughout the rest of Manhattan, it's such a rare feature. So, in terms of other interesting features over here, we talk about the old world socialites. There was the Seaman Drake Mansion. The mansion is long gone, but the arch for the entry for the driveway still exists. It's Broadway at 116th Street. It's partially hidden behind an auto repair shop. So it's only one of two freestanding arches in Manhattan, the other one being well known is the Washington Square Arch. And this is actually the last remaining structure of the Seaman Drake Mansion. The arch marking the entrance to the estate. The arch itself, it's made of marble quarried from the neighborhood. I mean, how is that for hyper-local use of material?
Love it.
And this arch, much like Washington Square Park, it was modeled on the Paris Arc de Triomphe.
Nice.
So that's pretty cool. In terms of like other aspects of things to see and do when you're up in Inwood. At the North Cove at 207th Street at the Harlem River, the shoreline has been rehabilitated from a polluted state into a wetland filled with geese, ducks, wild turkeys, and other waterfowl. So, yes, it is possible to see a wild turkey in Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah, I did get chased when I lived up in Westchester. I did get chased by a wild turkey in the street. Apparently,
Do you drink wild turkey?
Yeah, I don't, but
There's a bourbon called Wild Turkey.
there is, and it was not that kind of wild
Giving
turkey.
me a lot of headaches.
So it wasn't that kind, but yeah, I got chased by a wild turkey up in Westchester. Most of the old rowing clubs are gone, but the Inwood Canoe Club, it still exists. It's located on the Hudson River in Fort Washington Park near Dyckman. And that's kind of like on the border of Hudson Heights and Inwood. Visitors can rent out a canoe or kayak for a pretty reasonable fee. Columbia University, and I think we might have opened discussing this. Columbia University has two boathouses at the north end of Inwood Hill Park. Someone also painted a large letter C for Columbia in the same shade of blue as the Columbia's official color on the rocky outcropping on the Bronx side of the Spuyten-Duyvil Creek.
Actually, if you spend any time up there, and I used to live in Washington Heights, in the summertime, kids will often jump off those cliffs by the Columbia Sea, college kids or maybe neighborhood kids from the Bronx. It's a pretty cool thing to watch.
Yeah, and here's the crazy part. That giant letter C, it always seems to be freshly painted. Nobody knows who's responsible for it, though.
Right.
So somebody is maintaining it, but nobody knows who. Columbia doesn't.
Keep donating to your alumni association.
Yeah, I don't think Columbia is actually responsible for maintaining that. So that's like one of those strange oddities. Somebody cares about the neighborhood, though, apparently, and that that aspect over there. And Dyckman's really convenient because, subway access, this far north, it tends to be quite narrow over here. But Dyckman is convenient because both the A and the 1 train both stop along this street. Dyckman's really known right now for its restaurants, mostly Dominican comfort foods that tend to double as lounges and nightclubs. It's a pretty active scene up there and can get crowded and loud during the summer weekends. So, yeah, that's certainly among the things to see and do up in Inwood, and a little bit of of the history up there. But thank you very much for joining us for another episode of Harlem Stories.
Thank you.
Have a great one.